Well, I want to give a talk on the First Amendment and you. The First Amendment is really something that I've done a lot of research on. I really care about this a great deal and love talking about it. And I look forward to hearing some of your comments and reading your comments in the comment section below. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the First Amendment and you. So first off, the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution is vital for American citizens to understand. Understanding what the First Amendment says and what it means legally could help all in this country understand their fundamental free speech rights in the United States, whether it's at work or school or anywhere else in this country. And you know, I think a lot of times you think about freedom of speech, you think about higher education, and of course the workplace as well. So if higher education, is higher education a marketplace of ideas, or is it a place of popular zeitgeist? And an ultimate response, if higher education is a marketplace of ideas, that people will get offended, and perhaps that's the price of liberty and freedom. So free speech, I think that's what most of us think about when we say the First Amendment rights. But there's a lot more. So let's actually read through the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress or grievances. So you can see there, it's actually more than just the freedom of speech. It protects freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of petition. So there's a lot of things the First Amendment gives us protections of. And there are many legal issues involved with the First Amendment that professionals, wherever they're at in the country, be it work or school or wherever, you may face. And today, many citizens of the United States feel their constitutional rights of free speech are being infringed on whenever they can't voice their opinions. So I think one thing to kind of get and understand about the First Amendment and freedom of speech rights, they're not absolute. And what I mean by that, that technically the First Amendment rights issues are only related to the government and not to private institutions or corporations. And I know it's hard to kind of wrap your mind about this. So what does that mean? Well, it means the government can't throw you in jail or restrict your freedom of speech because they don't like what you're saying. So you can say whatever you want, you won't be arrested. However, if you potentially work for a company or whatever else, and you say something that's going to hurt the company or against the company's guidelines or whatever. Again, I'm not an attorney. I am definitely not a constitutional lawyer at all. But they have. It's not the same. The Constitution protects us from the government, especially the First Amendment protects us from the government. Now, to go along with this is that a lot of institutions actually go along with we want to, foster this freedom of speech, this protections that we have in the country, be it in a private institution or, government institution. So the First Amendment, doesn't prohibit private individuals, companies, or employers from restricting speech. Reasonable restrictions on time, place, and manner of speech can also be legally upheld. If I guess an example would be if you're in a business and people are you have a small business. Let's say you can fit like 20 people in it, and 25 people are just in there nonstop. You can't get any business done. You can't do any business now. I mean, if they're outside, if they're certain feet away from it, potentially. Again, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but these are type of things that might be okay. Well, yeah, it's just people come out at 3 in the morning and wake you up, or 2 in the morning, whatever. I don't know. Again, that's something that the courts would have to bring up. And private higher education institutions have different expectations than the public ones, and we see that in schools, be it elementary schools or high schools or universities, and depends on what state you're in as well. California has different laws than Texas does. So I think we need to dive into the founding fathers a little bit and understand how this actually came about and why there's actually a Bill of Rights. You might think of, why this is so important. Why wasn't this built into the Constitution? Why do we have the extra Bill of Rights to go along with these? Um, and Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. So let's talk a little bit about them. So there's some pictures and there's a Bill of Rights right there. So, these rights are so fundamental. Why aren't they in the Constitution? Well, in some aspects, if Thomas Jefferson didn't come back from Paris and say, hey, we need to write this down, have this written down to say these protections are there. And really, in a lot of ways, Alexander Hamilton was saying, well, just because it's not in the Constitution doesn't mean that we have the right to take that away from people. But basically, Thomas Jefferson said, no, we need to have it written out so that way everybody will know what's going on and what legal protections they have from the government. And basically that position, without a Bill of Rights, that protection of freedom of speech and press, he would not support the Constitution. And so, and again, I mentioned before that, say, well, just because it's not in there doesn't mean Congress could pass a law stripping these power of speech from the people. And Congress didn't have that power either. So, but basically, Thomas Jefferson was saying for this country, and they needed to say clearly that there are a list of untouchable legal areas in Congress that cannot transgress. And so basically, it's really interesting. And I guess Hamilton asked the framers and Thomas Jefferson, why do we need the Bill of Rights? Are we protecting ourselves from ourselves? And the answer is, yeah, we are. We're making sure the government can't take away these rights, and they're vital for they needed to be spelled out in federal law. So there's a couple of legal cases, and again, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a constitutional scholar or lawyer or anything like that. But as a layperson, I obviously read cases and kind of make some interpretations myself about why they're important. And let's talk about this case here, the Fleckner versus in New York versus in 1951. And this one, he was a student. He was a veteran from World War II, and he was talking about racism in society, and had a group around him, and there were people actually in the street a little bit, and police officers came over and see what was going on. And basically they asked him a couple of times, hey, people were saying, hey, if you don't stop this person from talking about racism and whatnot, that we're going to cause some violence. So the police officers try to say, hey, you need to stop, this crowd's getting unruly, we can't protect you and whatnot. After the third time, they arrest him on refusal to stop speaking on a violation of Section 722 of the Penal Law of New York, and forbids an incitement of a breach of peace. And basically, the Supreme Court upheld this conviction by 3-6, saying that the officers were trying to defuse a potentially violent situation without infringing on his freedom of speech. And so, and the dissenting Justice Hugo Black said the police should have protected Fleckner instead of placing him under arrest. But that was the dissenting thoughts on that. And the repercussions of this is that speakers with controversial, distasteful, or unpopular viewpoints, could be heard on campus or other places. And something called the heckler's veto. And basically, at some point, they're saying, well, there's can be some violence going on. We should protect this person from the crowd. And really, institutions should basically have a really clear and welcoming to these controversial viewpoints, and only use the heckler's veto in a very sparing way when it truly is some potentially violence will happen and whatnot. Maybe because the lack of law enforcement for that event, maybe they underestimated what was going on. I don't know. But again, these are all things that are legally thought out in the courts. And again, I'm not an attorney. So it should be used rarely and just to protect the institution from violence instead of restricting the speech of controversial ideas. And that's the whole point of freedom of speech. This case here, Roberts versus Harrigan, deals with in higher education institutions, and something called free speech zones. Basically, he wanted to talk about some of his religious viewpoints, and they said, here's a gazebo, and you can go talk there. And he says, well, no, I want to be able to talk more than this little gazebo way out in the middle of nowhere. And so he sues, and basically said that the freedom of speech on the campus are to encourage activities that are intended to serve or benefit the entire university community. And it was the view of the community that his request was expression of personal belief, and thus it was appropriate for just use that small little gazebo. So after the lawsuit, and this happens a lot with institutions or that get sued for First Amendment violations and whatnot, they added a lot more gazebos, and thinking that might have something to go on there. So this case didn't go to the Supreme Court. Instead, the federal court struck down the university's regulation to require students to obtain prior permission for freedom of speech. And basically, it said the prior permission requirement was not narrowly tailored and was too broadly interpreted by the university. So basically, put a cease and desist order forbidding that from going on. And so repercussions of this particular case is that there needs to be more than just a small little area that people can voice their freedom of speech and talk about controversial ideas and everything like that. It can't just be some small gazebo in the middle of nowhere. It needs to be more accessible, and it doesn't mean it has to be everywhere, but this means it can't just be in one little area there. So it's interesting. And again, I'm not an attorney. If you haven't heard that, I'm not an attorney. This case here was interesting. Pulaski and Illinois Community College. There was an art professor there, and they had a art show for the faculty, and he had some artwork that was a little bit suggestive. And he said it was realistic and was done in a certain style and whatnot like that. And it was clearly visible from the mall. So there was people that were voicing, complaints about this art. And so the college ordered him to remove his art. He refused, saying it's against his rights. They suggested to move it over by the art department, where individuals understand art, I guess, better, or it's not as public. Refused. The faculty there decided to just close the art show early because they weren't going to have the art show without everybody being in it. And basically goes to the Seventh Court of Appeals, and their decision was that it didn't violate the First Amendment rights, removing this offensive art and relocating to a different area. And really the big part of this, the repercussions of this, is art's for art's sake. So if it's just for art's sake, it can be moved around as long, because that's not against the freedom of speech. But if it's political art, then so that can't be restricted. So if something is political art-wise, that can't be moved because that's against the freedom of speech there. So an example would be if, say, somebody wants to ban, protesters' art. I don't know why, but let's pretend. And so if it's all the protesters, then that's fine. But if it's only one group of protesters, you can't just say that one's banned and this protesters aren't banned. It has to be, if it's political, then you can't remove it for that. So it's kind of interesting. And again, I'm interpreting these laws. I am not a lawyer. Maybe someone else would interpret them a little bit differently. So since the First Amendment protects the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition, all these are part of society, work, and academic life on colleges and campuses. And professionals and leaders may deal with several of these, daily, understanding these First Amendment court cases. And there's so many other cases. I mean, you can go over, I'm sure hundreds, if not even thousands of it, if you go into law school, if you're an attorney and whatnot like that, relating to the First Amendment and the constitutional and the Bill of Rights and whatnot. So, why is this important to understand? I think in a lot of ways that when you think about the free speech movements, you can kind of go back to the 60s to Berkeley. And they kind of now simultaneously synonymous with higher education, freedom of speech. In a lot of ways, without some type of protest movements going on, there wouldn't be changes in society if you don't have the protections of the Constitution to talk about ideas that are seen at one time as being controversial. no one would ever hear about them, especially if areas say, well, we don't want to hear about that. We're not going to give you a permit to go out and protest or give a speech or whatever on that. So all these things are important. Without strong freedoms of speech protections, there's a lot of things in this country that wouldn't have developed. And also, it's not a coincidence that these events happened in the 50s, late 50s and 60s, because at this point, finally, court cases were being interpreting the freedom of speech strongly, that these protections should be strongly protected. And so a lot of these ideas were around before that, but before these legal protections, they can go out and give a speech or march or talk about controversial subjects in public. And so it really takes really starting in 1925 and really kind of going into the 50s with the second Red Scare, that the courts start giving strong protections for the Constitution. So quite simply, without the strong freedoms of speech, the United States of America, this would not exist. And especially, we take it for granted that we can talk and talk about ideas and everything. So, the freedom of speech issues are definitely important wherever you're at. Doesn't matter if you're in a classroom or at work or at home. Understanding these are really important. And, I think I found this doing the research. I thought this was kind of interesting to talk about. If you do these 4 things, you never have any problems with free speech. Don't talk to people you disagree with. Do not disagree with others, bosses or teachers or whoever that have egos that can't take it. Join groups that reflect who you are when you're young, like when you're in high school. And if you just avoid talking about controversial topics altogether. But this is America, without disagreements, individuals will never be able to defend their ideas or grow in understandings in others' beliefs. And, in a lot of ways, I go into, whenever I talk to somebody or debate somebody, I go in there thinking, maybe I'm not right. Maybe I should go in there with an open mind and learn from that. And a lot of times I go in there and think, well, no, I am right. I feel like these are my beliefs and whatnot. And if I need to stand to be corrected, I can do that as well. So if you're willing to change and whatnot like that. So this is a quote from Noam Chomsky. I believe that people have the right of freedom and expression, whatever their views, that the importance of defending these rights is all the greater when the person expressing these views are abhorrent to virtually everyone. So that's the whole point of freedom of speech in a lot of aspects, is that people saying things that you find horrible to who you are as a person, they have the right to talk about them. And in a lot of ways, that will help you defend, help you realize who you are as an individual even more so by listening to others and disagreeing with them. And maybe you can work together and find some type of consistency at some point as well. So in a lot of ways, if you want to have some debates going on, maybe in a lot of ways, encourage everybody, students or whatever, to be lifelong, practice seek out intelligent individuals they disagree with and open up these dialogues. Through this debate can be protected in both inside and the school or workplace. Debate your family in a respectful manner. I know there's a lot of families out there that, especially over the last 10 years or more of politics, whatnot, and families that don't even talk to each other because of politics. You can do it in a respectful manner. And free speech, maybe a free speech orientation when you go to school and have some debates right away, and realize that the importance of controversial debate on campus and workplace can really strengthen the freedom of speech protections as well. When individuals' views are unpopular, they tend to see free speech as their ally. When personal moral views are strongly held, highly specific and dominant, they tend to see free speech as a threat or a problem to be solved. And there's a lot of buzzwords that we've heard throughout, political correctness, hate speech, cancel culture, call out culture, used by the media and schools and workplace. And citizens who learn that when confronted with difficult or challenging ideas or speech and listen respectfully and defending their thoughts will further decrease the political divisions going on in this nation. A society with individuals willing to listen to speakers they disagree with and embrace those strong protections of freedom of speech, and encourage these individuals to continue this practice for the rest of their lives. And I think in a lot of ways we'll have a lot more um, friendly society if we are able to disagree and listen to others' ideas. And in a lot of ways, it will strengthen our ideas as well and our beliefs. Well, without free speech, you can't know what other people are thinking about or believe, and individuals can't uh, understand the world unless they understand what society is thinking, believing, or caring about. And having strong protection of free speech will allow this to happen. Society is not safer if you don't know what other people are thinking. You know, I think in a lot of ways it's less safe that you don't understand other ideas, or especially if there's a group that doesn't feel they have ability to talk about what they want to talk about. Um, when free speech is protected, it protects more than just a person exercising their constitutional rights. Strong freedom of speech protections protects everybody. Leaders would benefit from understanding various, First Amendment court cases as well. And the First Amendment protects, provides many protections for students, faculty, staff, community, the workplace. Professionals who understand the law can accommodate individuals who want to practice their constitutional rights of freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition, whether it be in school or in the workplace or wherever else in the United States. And of course, this is going to be challenging at times. Sometimes you hear ideas you just really don't like at all, don't even want to hear. But if you remember, the Bill of Rights allows people to talk about things that are controversial, and you can respect that. And I think in a lot of ways it would be interesting. In a better society, we have these open debates degree. And again, I would also put along with this, going with the ad hominem attack, just calling somebody whatever, pejorative or whatever, because they don't believe what you're believing in. That's not the way you learn from one another as well. Listen and say, well, I disagree with you 100% on this idea, and this is the reason why. These are the reasons why, and there you go. Individuals have the right to say unpopular statements without government punishment, and that's because the First Amendment protects you. Understanding your constitutional rights will allow you to use your constitutional rights. So, one last quote here: "A nation that does not educate in liberty will not long preserve it, and will not even know when it's lost." So, thank you again. Did a lot of research on this, and I hope you enjoyed this little talk on the First Amendment. And so what do you think? Do you agree with some of these things, or some things you disagree with? You have the constitutional right to voice those concerns as well. Anything that you agree on as well. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day. And as always, rock and roll, it does compute. If you like this amazing content, please subscribe to this amazing channel, Computed.